The blade in his hand was coated in a poison that had no antidote, but when the assassin looked into the eyes of the woman he was sent to kill, he didn't strike, he dropped the dagger and pressed his forehead to the floor in an act of absolute submission. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. You have to understand that Silas was not a man who made mistakes. In the underworld of the Seven Kingdoms, they called him the Wraith. He didn't just kill people, he deleted them from existence. He could scale a glass wall in the rain. He could hold his breath for 5 minutes. He could kill a man with a quill, a spoon, or a sheet of paper. For 15 years, he had been the favorite weapon of the High Council. If a duke became too greedy, Silas paid him a visit. If a general planned a coup, Silas was the shadow in his tent. He had no family, no friends, and no past. He was a blank slate written in blood, but this contract was different. The client was Lord Malachar, the Queen's own uncle. A man with a smile like a shark and pockets deep enough to buy a small country. He had summoned Silas to a crypt beneath the city at midnight. Queen Ethelgard, Malachar had whispered, his eyes gleaming with malice. She is mad. She plans to burn the city to purge the plague. She is a danger to the realm. You must end her before sunrise. The price was 10 million gold pieces. Enough to buy an island and disappear forever. Silas accepted. He didn't care about politics. He didn't care if the queen was mad or a saint. He only cared about the job. The mission was suicide. The Queen's Tower, the spire of the moon, was the most heavily guarded structure in the world. It rose 1,000 feet into the air, surrounded by a moat of jagged rocks and patrolled by the Skyguard, knights who rode griffins. No one had ever broken into the spire. But Silas wasn't no one. You have to imagine the physical toll of the climb. It was a stormy night, the wind howling like a banshee, rain lashing against the black stone of the tower. Silas was climbing the outside, clinging to cracks in the masonry no wider than a coin. His fingers were bleeding. His muscles were screaming. One slip, and he would fall into the abyss. He climbed for 3 hours, a spider in the dark, until he reached the balcony of the royal chamber. He picked the lock of the glass doors. It took him 3 seconds. He slipped inside. The room was vast, lit only by the dying embers of a fireplace and the flashes of lightning outside. It smelled of lavender and old books. It didn't smell like the lair of a mad tyrant. It smelled like a home. Silas moved across the thick carpet. He made no sound. He was a shadow detached from the wall. He approached the massive 4-poster bed where the queen slept. He drew his dagger. The poison on the blade, the widow's kiss, would stop her heart instantly. It would look like natural causes. He reached the side of the bed. He raised the blade. He prepared to strike, and then, a flash of lightning illuminated the room. The bed was empty. You are late, Silas, a voice said from the shadows. Silas spun around, crouching low, the dagger ready. He had checked the room. He was sure it was empty. How had he missed her? Sitting in a high-backed chair by the fireplace was a woman. She wasn't wearing a crown or royal robes. She was wearing a simple white nightgown. Her hair, silver as moonlight, fell over her shoulders. She was looking into the fire, her back to him. Lord Malachar pays well, I assume, she asked. Her voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. It wasn't the voice of a madwoman. It was a voice that sounded like a cello played in an empty hall. Silas didn't speak. He calculated the distance. 10 feet. He could cross it in a second. He told you I was mad, the queen continued, still not looking at him. He told you I was going to burn the city. Malachar always did lack imagination. He uses the same lie every time he tries to kill a ruler. Silas took a step forward. He tightened his grip on the dagger. He was a professional. He didn't talk to targets. He eliminated them. The queen stood up. She turned around to face him, and Silas froze. You have to understand, Silas had seen the queen's face on coins. He had seen her on statues. But those were lies. They showed a stern, cold monarch. The woman standing in front of him was different. She had a scar running through her left eyebrow. She had eyes that were two different colors, one green, one violet, but it wasn't the eyes that stopped his heart. It was the necklace she was wearing. It was a cheap, wooden carving of a wolf, strung on a piece of leather cord. It was worn, polished smooth by years of touching. It was worthless trash compared to the diamonds in the room. Silas felt the air leave his lungs. The room started to spin. 20 years ago, Silas hadn't been an assassin. He had been a street rat in the slums of the lower city. He had a best friend. A little girl named Elara. They were inseparable. They survived by stealing apples and hiding from the guards. One winter, when the snow was deep enough to bury a dog, Silas had carved a wooden wolf for her. To protect you, he had told her. Because I am the wolf and you are my pack. The next day, the royal guard had swept through the slums, looking for bastard children of the king. They had taken Elara. Silas had tried to fight them, but he was a boy. They beat him until he was unconscious. When he woke up, she was gone. He thought she was dead. He thought the king had purged her. He had spent 20 years hardening his heart, becoming a weapon so he would never be powerless again. He looked at the queen. He looked at the wooden wolf. Elara, he whispered. The word came out broken, a sound that didn't belong in the throat of a killer. The queen smiled. It was a sad, weary smile. Hello, wolf, she said softly. It took you a long time to find me. Silas looked at the dagger in his hand. The weapon he had been hired to use on his only friend. The weapon paid for by the uncle who wanted to steal her throne. He realized the truth in a split second. Malachar knew. Malachar knew Silas was the boy from the slums. He had hired Silas not just to kill the queen, but to kill his own soul. It was a cruel, poetic joke. Silas's hand shook. The dagger felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Do it, Queen Ethelgard, Elara said, stepping forward. She opened her arms, exposing her chest. If it is you, Silas, I accept it. I am tired. The crown is heavy, and the wolves are at the door. I would rather die by your hand than by Malachar's poison. She wasn't afraid. She was offering him a choice. Silas looked at her. He saw the little girl who had shared a crust of bread with him in the snow. He saw the only person who had ever loved him. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. Silas dropped the dagger. It clattered onto the stone floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He dropped to his knees. He bowed his head until his forehead touched the cold stone. It wasn't the bow of a subject to a queen. It was the bow of a sinner seeking redemption. I am yours, Silas choked out. I am the wolf. And I protect the pack. The queen walked over to him. She didn't call the guards. She knelt down on the floor beside the assassin. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scars of his life. Then stand up, wolf, she whispered, her voice hardening into steel. Because the pack is under attack. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the chamber burst open. Treason, a voice roared. It was Lord Malachar. He stood in the doorway, flanked by 20 heavily armed guards. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold. He saw the dropped dagger. He saw the assassin kneeling. I knew you wouldn't do it, Malachar laughed, drawing his sword. You always were soft, Silas. That's why I brought insurance. He snapped his fingers. The guards leveled their crossbows. Not at the queen. At Silas. Kill them both, Malachar commanded. And burn the room. We will say the assassin started a fire. 20 crossbow bolts were released at the exact same second, creating a sound like a giant whip cracking the air. But the target they were aiming at was no longer there. You have to understand that reaction time is the difference between a master assassin and a corpse. When Malachir shouted, "Fire," ordinary men would have frozen. But Silas didn't hear the command. He saw the muscles in the guard's trigger fingers tighten. In that fraction of a second, he didn't run away. He kicked the heavy, thick Persian rug that lay between him and the door. He kicked it upward with such force that it created a temporary wall of wool and dust. Thwack. 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 12 bolts buried themselves in the rug. 6 shattered against the stone floor. 2 whistled past Silas's ear, close enough to shave him. In the chaos of the dust cloud, Silas didn't retreat. He grabbed Queen Ethelgard, Elara, by the waist and threw them both behind the heavy oak vanity table. A split second later, the wood exploded as the guards reloaded and fired again. Splinters rained down on them like confetti. "You have no weapon," Elara hissed, pressing her back against the wood. She wasn't screaming. She was analyzing. "There is a secret passage behind the fireplace, but we need time to open it." "I don't need a weapon," Silas whispered, looking at the layout of the room. "I am the weapon." He looked at the fireplace. Beside it stood a large crystal decanter of high-proof brandy. "Stay down," Silas commanded. He rolled out from behind the vanity. He didn't stand up, he stayed low, moving like a lizard across the floor. Malachir saw him. "There he is. Shoot him. Pin him to the floor." Malachir screamed, pointing his sword. The guards adjusted their aim. But Silas wasn't aiming for the guards. He grabbed the heavy crystal decanter and hurled it into the roaring fireplace. Boom! The alcohol ignited instantly. A fireball erupted from the hearth, blowing smoke and ash into the room. For a few seconds, the royal chamber turned into a blinding inferno of light and heat, followed immediately by choking gray smoke. The guards were blinded. They coughed, waving their hands, losing their formation. That was all Silas needed. He disappeared into the smoke. Now, you have to imagine this from the guard's perspective. They are 20 armed men in a smoke-filled room. They can't see 2 feet in front of them. And somewhere in that gray haze is the Wraith. The first guard died without making a sound. Silas stepped out of the smoke, snapped the man's neck, took his short sword, and vanished again. The second guard screamed as he was pulled into the shadows. The psychological terror set in. They started firing their crossbows blindly, hitting the walls, the furniture, and even each other. "Stop shooting. You idiots!" Malachir shrieked, backing away toward the door. "Form a circle. Protect me," but it was too late. The wolf was in the flock. Silas moved with a brutal, rhythmic efficiency. He wasn't fighting, he was harvesting. He used the smoke to isolate them. He used their fear to confuse them. A slash to the leg here, a pommel to the temple there. Within 2 minutes, 12 guards were on the floor, groaning or silent, but Silas was slowing down. He was human. A lucky swing from a guard's mace caught him in the ribs. He grunted, stumbling back. Another guard slashed his arm. He was bleeding. He was outnumbered. Suddenly, a guard lunged at Silas's unprotected back. Silas was engaged with 2 others. He couldn't block it. Thunk, the guard froze. He looked down. A letter opener, gold, sharp, and buried to the hilt, was sticking out of his neck. He collapsed. Behind him stood the queen. Elara held a heavy brass candlestick in her other hand. She wasn't hiding. She was fighting. Her white nightgown was stained with soot, her hair was wild, but she looked every inch a warrior. "I told you," she shouted over the noise, smashing the candlestick into the face of another attacker. "We are a pack," Silas grinned through the blood on his teeth. The 2 of them, back to back, moved through the remaining guards. It was a dance they hadn't practiced in 20 years, but the rhythm was still there. The boy from the slums and the girl who stole apples. They fought with a synchronicity that terrified the remaining soldiers. Seeing the tide turn, the remaining 5 guards threw down their weapons and fled. They weren't paid enough to fight a demon and a warrior queen, only Malachor remained. The uncle stood by the door, his face pale, his sword shaking in his hand. The room was silent now, save for the crackling of the fire and the groans of the fallen. Silas stepped forward. He was bleeding from 3 different wounds, but he didn't look injured. He looked unstoppable. He picked up something from the floor. It was the dagger. The one coated with the widow's kiss. Stay back. Malachor squealed, brandishing his sword. I am of royal blood. You cannot touch me. I will pay you. Double. Triple. I'll give you the kingdom. Silas didn't stop walking. You already paid me, he said softly. You paid me to kill the threat to the realm. Malachor lunged. It was a desperate, clumsy strike. Silas didn't even use his sword. He sidestepped, grabbed Malachor's wrist, and twisted. The sword clattered to the floor. Silas kicked Malachor in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The nobleman slid down, gasping for air. Silas knelt down, just as he had done for the queen earlier. But this time, there was no reverence in his eyes. Only ice. He held the poisoned dagger inches from Malachor's face. Please, Malachor wept, snot running down his nose. Silas, have mercy. I am not Silas tonight, the assassin whispered. I am the wolf. And wolves don't show mercy to those who hunt their kin. He didn't stab Malachor. He didn't need to. He simply took the dagger and made a small, thin cut on Malachor's cheek. A scratch. Barely enough to draw blood. Malachor froze. He felt the sting. Then he felt the cold. No, he whispered, the widow's kiss, Silas said, standing up and wiping the blade on his pants. You said it was painless. Let's hope you were telling the truth. Malachor clawed at his throat. His eyes rolled back. In 10 seconds, the man who wanted to steal the throne was nothing more than a lump of expensive silk on the floor. Silas turned to the queen. The adrenaline crashed. He swayed. His vision blurred. The blow to his ribs was bad. He fell to one knee, then to the side. Elara was there instantly. She caught him before his head hit the stone. She pulled his head into her lap, disregarding the blood soaking her gown. Silas, she cried, pressing her hands against his wounds. Guards! Maester! Help, Elara! Silas whispered, his voice weak. He reached into his pocket. His bloody fingers pulled out the wooden wolf she had returned to him. You kept it, for 20 years, she sobbed, rocking him. I kept it every day. I knew you would come back. I didn't come back to kill you, he rasped, his eyes closing. I came back, to walk you home. The doors burst open again. This time, it was the royal guard, the loyal ones, alerted by the noise. They saw the carnage. They saw the dead traitor. And they saw their queen holding a street rat in her arms like he was the most precious thing in the world. Flash forward 2 weeks, Silas stands on the balcony of the spire. He is wearing a uniform now, black leather with silver trim. He is the Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard. He doesn't hide in the shadows anymore. He stands in the light, right beside the throne. Queen Ethelgard sits on her chair, reading a decree. She looks up and catches his eye. She touches the wooden wolf around her neck. He touches the silver wolf pin on his cloak. They don't speak. They don't need to. The pack is together. And the kingdom is safe.